All right, y'all, this is story 60, The King's Unhappy Son. Once there was a king who had no male children. Every night he prayed for a son, and finally one was born to him. But when the boy became of age, he didn't want to see or talk to anyone. When the father invited young people in, the youth refused to have anything to do with them. The king didn't know what to do, so he called all the doctors in the land to his palace. He told them that his son would not talk to anyone or even look at them. The doctors met for 1 week, and finally they told the king that there was only one way to make the boy happy. The king was to find the happiest man in the land and get his shirt from him. Then he was to put the shirt on his son, and this would make him happy. The king sent all his men over the land to look for the happiest man and to get his shirt. Men were sent here, there, and everywhere. There were 2 men who had to go around a mountain to get to the town, but instead of going around the mountain, they decided to go over it. As soon as they got to the bottom, they saw a pasture with a man taking care of some sheep. When they got to the man, they asked him if he were happy. The man took his flute out and started to play. He said he had everything that he wanted. No one said anything to him there. He did as he pleased and had plenty of food, water, and fresh air. Then the man asked him again if he were happy, and he said that he was the happiest man in the world. "This is just the man that we are looking for," the men said. They were happy not only for the king, but also for the reward that they would get for finding the man. The men stayed with the man for a week to make sure that he was really the happiest man in the world. When they asked him if he would do something for the king, he said he'd do anything for him. The men asked for his shirt, but he didn't know what they were talking about. They kept trying to explain, and finally got him to take off his sheepskin jacket, only to find that he was wearing nothing under it, no shirt. No one in the rest of the land was as happy as this man. But since he had no shirt, the king's son still didn't talk or look at anyone. All right, story 61, The Snow Boy. Alex Rose had served in the armed forces during the war. At the conclusion of his service, he returned home for the first time in 9 years. He was very happy to see his wife, but was astonished to find a 2-year-old boy in his home. His wife claimed that the boy was their son. Alex argued that it was impossible for him to have a son who was only 2 years old, when he had not been home for 9 years. His wife then proceeded to tell him the following story, which seemed to him too incredible to believe. She said that on a particular day, she had been out of doors when, much to her amazement, snow began to fall from a sunny and cloudless sky, resting only on her chest. Now snow had fallen on the ground beside her or elsewhere in her surroundings. It was a strange happening, and to climax the incident, she had given birth to a baby boy the following day, all of which she believed was due to the snow that fell upon her chest. Alex did not believe the story his wife related, but decided to act as though he did. One day he took the boy for a walk and left him with a farmer and his family. When he returned home, instead of telling his wife what had actually happened, he told her that while he and the boy were walking, the child began to melt in the hot sun. The wife, knowing of the strange thing that had happened to her, believed the story. The boy, then living at the farmhouse, proceeded along the path of strange happenings that had been characteristic of his life. of his life in the world up to that time. In the next 2 years, he advanced in growth from 2 years to about 21 years. All this was strange indeed, but to add to the strangeness of the happenings that had taken place during this segment of Alex's life was that 2 years after he had taken the boy away, there came a succession of snowfalls each night. The unsuccessful part of all this was that the snow fell only on the house of Alex Rose. Alex, remembering what his wife had told him about the birth of the boy, associated the series of snowfalls with the boy and went to the farmer's house to find him. He realized that he had made a terrible mistake in taking the boy away, for he now believed that what his wife had told him was true. When he reached the farm, he found that the farmer, his family, and the boy had been burned to death in the flames that had destroyed the farmhouse on the night that the snowfalls had begun. Story 62. The Spendthrift Son. Once there was a wealthy man who had a son. The son was always going out and spending money. His father urged him to stop, since someday he would run out of money and lose all his friends. But the son would not listen and kept on spending his money. As a result, the father prepared one of his rooms, taking a section from the ceiling. He made a cardboard rafter that was hollow inside and stuffed it with money. He then tied a rope around it and replaced it so that it looked as if it were part of the rafters. When the son asked for more money, his father took him to the room and showed him the rafter with the rope, saying, "When I die and you run out of money and lose all your friends, put this rope around your neck and hang yourself here, as no one will look after you." After the father died, it turned out the way he said it would. The son ran out of money and sold his good clothes, shoes, jewelry, and all that he owned. His clothes turned into rags, and he was starving. As his friends had forsaken him, he remembered what his father had said, went to the room, and put the rope around his neck. As he jumped from a chair to hang himself, the cardboard rafter broke into two, and out fell all the money. He then realized what a good father he had had. It's never too late to learn a lesson. And he said, "God bless my father wherever he is." He took the money and dressed up nicely. His so-called friends noticed and began to hang around him again. So he invited all of them to his house for dinner. He then went to the butcher shop and bought a lot of soup bones and steak. At the dinner, the steak was served to him and his servant, and the soup bones were served to his friends. His friends complained, "What kind of a friend is he? He eats steak and serves his guests soup and bones?" He answered them, "You ate all my meat before, and now all that is left is soup and bones." Story 63. The Rooster. Once there was a husband and wife who lived on a farm. Wherever they went, they had to travel by donkey. One day they went to town, both riding on the donkey's back. The baby donkey followed his mother to town and called out, "Mother, wait for me. You are always hurrying." The mother replied, "You can run and catch up with me. I have a big load on my back, and I have to walk fast so I can reach home and put it down." The master heard them and laughed. His wife asked him what he was laughing about. He said, "Oh, nothing." She said, "There must be something. I want to know." He said, "I can't tell you." She kept asking him and saying, "I want to know. I want to know." He said, "If you want me to tell you, I will. But you'll have to call the priest for me first, so I can confess, because I am going to die." "Why are you going to die?" He said, "If I tell you what you want to know, I will die." His secret was that he could understand what animals said, and no one else could. He was the only person who could understand animals because he was without sin. This secret he was supposed to keep to himself. She said, "That's all right." So she went to get the priest. While she was on her way, the man sat on the porch steps watching the chickens and rooster in the yard. The hens were saying to the rooster, "You act a fool all the time. Don't you know that our master is going to die?" The rooster said, "That's because he's not smart. See how many of you there are. I keep you all under my control. Behind the door is a big club, and when his wife comes, if he wanted to, he could teach her to respect him." The master heard this and got up from the steps and hid behind the door. When his wife came, he hit her on the head, knocking her down. Soon the priest came and asked, Who has to confess? The master pointed to his wife, who was on the floor, and said, "There she is." The priest said, "She just came to call me." The master replied, "I'm sorry, but she's the one who is sick." So the rooster saved his master's life. Story 64, A Long Wait. Several months after a young man and woman had been married, it was necessary for them to separate, as the husband could find no work. The eager and adventurous young man set out for a larger city to seek employment with the promise that he would either return or send for his wife within a very short time. After being in the city for a few days, he located a job with a widower. He was to work on the man's farm just outside town during the day and be somewhat of a companion in his spare time. Since he was given a comfortable room and adequate wages, he accepted the job and began enjoying his independence and the liveliness of the big city, something to which he was not accustomed. He remained there working hard and having a good time, never once mentioning to his employer that he had a young bride waiting for him to return. Yet he always remained faithful to her. 30 years passed, and he had not mentioned his wife, nor had he attempted to get in contact with her. The farmer, who had grown old, noticed a sudden change in his farmhand and asked if he were troubled. Being unable to keep his misdoings to himself any longer, he poured out the story of his life. The old man was most sympathetic, but stressed the fact that much wrong had already been done, and it was now his duty to rectify his behavior. The man pondered for several weeks over what he must do, and then decided that he must return home to his wife. He packed his belongings and began his journey. He had not gone far, however, when he became worried and uneasy about returning. Consequently, he turned around and went back to the farmer's house. The old man asked him why he had come back, and the man told him that he needed advice before he could carry out his plan. The farmer, not wanting to interfere but knowing the man's need for reassurance, told him to be careful not to comment upon or criticize anything he might see or hear while on his journey, and he would return with a clear mind. He again attempted to depart, but felt that he must have more advice. Again he sought words of wisdom from the old farmer, and was told that near his hometown he would find a new road that was much nicer than the old road. He said, however, that even though it would be a rougher and longer route, he should take the old road, and under no circumstances should he travel on the new one. Again, the younger man left, but he still felt that he must have more advice. This time, the old farmer simply told him, "Don't shoot at first sight," and wished him well on his journey. Having no other mode of transportation, he began his journey by foot. He walked for several hours and became weary and hungry, coming across a small inn along the road. He asked if he might stay there to rest and to get a meal. While he was eating, the innkeeper went out to the well, but instead of bringing up water, he had his wife in the bucket. He brought her brought her in and fed her a meal in a skull, and then lowered her back in the well. The man was appalled, but remembered the old farmer's advice. He made no comment. He remained at the inn for the night and arose early to continue his trip. The innkeeper stopped him and asked him why he did not comment on the manner in which he was punishing his wife. He replied that it was the innkeeper's affair and he was not concerned. The innkeeper was amazed at his reply and took him out to his backyard, which was lined with many graves. He explained that all these people had stopped at his inn and had attempted to stop him from keeping his wife in the well, so he had killed them. Being pleased that the present traveler was not concerned, he gave him a jug of his finest wine and sent him on his way. As he neared his hometown, the traveler was weary. Then a young man came by in a carriage and offered him a ride. Before accepting, however, the man inquired as to which route he was taking and learned it was the new road. Again, remembering the old man's advice, he decided to refuse the ride, even though he was near exhaustion. When he arrived in town, there was much confusion among the people. Upon inquiry, he learned that the young man who had offered him the ride had been robbed and murdered by bandits. He began inquiring about his family and learned that his parents were dead and his family were all gone, except his wife. He found out where she lived and then took a room in an inn across the street from her house. The next morning he arose early and began watching the house from his window. In a short while, he saw his wife come to the door with a man and kiss him as he left. Jealousy rose in him, because even though he had never returned to her, he had always been faithful, and he decided there was one thing he must do before the day ended. He took his gun in hand and sat waiting for the man to return. As it was nearing dawn, he began to recall the words of the wise old farmer. Don't shoot at first sight. He then went downstairs and asked the inn clerk about the family who lived across the street. He explained that the woman had been very young when her husband left to seek work. He said that the husband had never returned, nor had he sent support. The woman had been taken in by various families as she was pregnant and in need of help. She remained with these families over a 30-year period and had worked desperately to rear her son and to educate him for the priesthood. Just then, the same man returned, and the husband again saw his wife greet him at the door with affection. He then realized that the man with whom his wife was living was not a lover, but a son he had deserted. Story 65, Wedding Gift. An elderly man was cutting firewood in a large forest in North Czechoslovakia. Because it was getting dark and he was alone, he decided to start home. But as he was preparing to leave, he heard men on horseback approaching. Since he knew the woods were infested with robbers, he became frightened. Sending home the horse and cart, which was loaded with wood, he climbed a nearby tree and hid amongst the leaves. After a few minutes, 4 men approached carrying 2 large bushel baskets loaded with money they had stolen. The robbers stopped directly under the tree where the man was hiding, which was beside a large stone. Under this stone, they dug a hole and put the money in it. Then 3 of the robbers killed one of their friends and left his body on top of the money to guard it. They covered the hole up and put the rock on top of the hole. The money would be safe until the spirit of the dead robber was saved. This could be done only by having a wedding feast on top of the rock covering his wealth-filled grave. The 3 robbers then proceeded to leave. The man in the tree, having heard all the conversation, waited until the next morning to be sure the robbers did not return, and then climbed down the tree. He returned home and did not say a word about what he had seen, but he had a plan. The man's youngest son was 16 and unmarried when his father suddenly told him he could marry. The son was overjoyed. However, the father insisted that the wedding feast be held in the woods. Although the son thought this was unusual, he was very much in love with a young girl in their village, and so he agreed. After the wedding, the couple proceeded to the woods to hold the wedding feast. The man laid the tablecloth on the large rock, and the family began to eat. After the dinner, all were frightened by a voice saying, "You have freed my soul. Take the money under the rock." The man then told of the scene he had witnessed in the woods. After his tale, the men moved the rock and dug up the hoard left by the robbers. The newlyweds, with the money from under the rock, founded one of the richest families in that part of the country. Story 66. The Gypsy and the Bear. In a small cabin near a wooded section of a small southern European country, there once lived a gypsy. He lived alone and was content with his way of life, since he owned a large store of food and did not have to work hard. One day, while sitting in a chair tilted back against the cabin and watching the beautiful scenery around him, he was startled to see a large, vicious-looking bear approaching. Although very frightened, the gypsy managed to retain his composure, and when the bear was within a few feet of him, asked with a feigned air of annoyance, "What can I do for you, bear?" The bear stopped and said, "I'm hungry, and I came here to eat you." The gypsy, a very quick-witted man, replied, "In case you haven't heard, I'm Gregory, the strongest man in Europe, and I can kill you with a single blow. Why not be friends with me, since you are probably the strongest bear in these woods? You can share my cabin and food, and together we will be invincible." The bear was not completely convinced that Gregory was a stronger individual than himself, but he did not want to take a chance. Living with the gypsy, he would soon find out how strong he really was. So they agreed to live together. The bear volunteered to cook supper that evening, and he handed Gregory a 200-gallon barrel and said, "Take this and get me some water from the well." The gypsy, knowing he could not lift the barrel even if it were empty, said, "No, we need more water than that. I won't have any use for the barrel." He then walked out to the well and began to dig a ditch around it. The bear, watching curiously, asked, "What are you doing, Greg?" "I'm going to move the whole well closer to the cabin, so you can have all the water you need," replied Gregory. The bear was obviously impressed, but he said, "Never mind, that will take too long." He then picked up the barrel, filled it with water from the well, and went back to his cooking. The gypsy breathed a sigh of relief. The next day, the bear volunteered to barbecue some meat outside the cabin and said to the gypsy, "Run over to the woods and get me 2 or 3 large trees to build a fire with." "Well, we'll need more wood than that," said the gypsy. "I'll get all you can use." The bear watched as the gypsy got a large rope from the cabin and disappeared into the woods. When he failed to return in about 20 minutes, the bear went to investigate and found Gregory patiently tying a section of the rope to each trunk of about 50 trees. "What are you doing?" asked the bear. Why, when I have enough trees tied to this rope, I'm going to drag them back to our cabin so that you'll have plenty of wood," replied Gregory. The bear looked at him with wonder and said to himself, "What a strong man he must be," but he was impatient for dinner and said, "Never mind, I can't wait." With this, he ripped 5 trees out of the ground and walked back to the cabin with them. That night, after they had both gone to bed, the bear decided to kill the gypsy while he slept. About midnight, he went outside and got a huge club made from the trunk of a large tree and went back inside to the gypsy's bed and beat the still form under the blankets until he was exhausted. Then he went back to bed and dreamed of the delicious meal he would have in the morning. But little did he know that Gregory had suspected him of treachery, and when the bear had gone outside, he put old clothes under the covers and hidden himself under the bed. After the bear went back to sleep, he got back into bed. Next morning, when the bear awakened, he was shocked to see the gypsy whistling happily, fixing breakfast. How did you sleep last night?" asked the bear. Never slept better in my life, replied the gypsy. Oh, said the bear, slightly stunned. Although the bear was greatly impressed by the gypsy's seemingly great strength, he decided to have a showdown. How would you like to race me on the top of the mountain this morning? He asked. The gypsy reluctantly agreed, knowing if the bear won, he would find out that the gypsy was nothing but a bluff, and as a result, would make a meal of him. But there was no way out, and so they started up the mountainside, the bear quickly taking the lead with the gypsy close behind. It soon became obvious that the bear would win the race easily. After several hours, the bear reached to the top of the mountain and turned around to see how far behind the gypsy was. But Gregory was nowhere in sight. What an easy victory that was, thought the bear. Now I know I'm going to make a meal of him. Suddenly, the bear heard the gypsy's voice behind him. Where have you been? I've been waiting for you for an hour, he said. The bear was so flabbergasted that he ran off mumbling to himself. The gypsy smiled and recalled how, when the bear began to pull away from him at the beginning of the race, he had reached out and grabbed the bear's tail and hung on while the bear pulled him up the mountainside, and after reaching the top, how the bear had turned around to see how far he had left the gypsy behind, and in so doing had swung the gypsy around behind him, causing the bear to think the gypsy had been there all along. All right, story 67. The Shimmer and the Flute. John and his wife dug a hole, put some rocks on it, and covered it with dirt. Then they built a fire on top of the ground. After the fire had burned out, they scraped away all the ashes and made it look like it had before. Then they put a kettle of water on top of the ground with the hot rocks underneath. The water began to boil. John and his wife sat down and waited. Two men passed by and, seeing water boiling in a kettle without heat, asked what caused it to boil. John told them that this was a magic kettle. The men looked at each other in amazement. Then one man said, I will give you a cow for the kettle, thinking how convenient it would be to own the kettle. John agreed to the trade. He and his wife took the cow home, butchered it and skinned it, and put the meat in a smokehouse. While John was taking the intestines away, he thought of another scheme. He told his wife that he would fill the intestine with blood, wrap it around her neck, and that night she was to come to the tavern where he would be and pretend to quarrel with him. He would then take a knife and cut the bladder as if to kill her, and she would fall to the floor. He would then take out a flute, play it, and she would pretend to return to life. John's wife agreed to this. That night, John went to the tavern. After a while, his wife came, and they got into a quarrel as planned. John pulled out his knife and cut her throat. The blood began to flow freely, and the wife fell to the floor as if dead. The other men looked on in amazement at the brutal murder that had just been committed before their eyes. They asked John what he was going to do. John calmly sat down and began to play the flute. After he had played for about 2 minutes, his wife got up off the floor, walked outside, down the road, and home. The men in the tavern were so completely bewildered that they couldn't talk. Finally, after a long silence, they asked John what kind of magic this was. John told them this was a magic flute, which could bring the dead back to life. Then he told them that he needed money and would willingly sell the flute if given the right price. One man thought of all the money he could make by bringing dead people back to life. He bought the flute from John for an enormous sum, and John hurried home, packed all his belongings, and he and his wife left town. In the meantime, the man who bought the flute went home. He found his wife with another man, and he became furious. The other man ran away, and his wife frantically started to make excuses. He cunningly thought how he would cure her of flirting. He would kill her, and after a while, bring her back to life and really give her a good scare. He took out his knife and cut her throat, just as he had seen John do. His wife fell to the floor dead. After a while, he began to play the flute, but nothing happened. Frantically, he played. Still, nothing happened. He tried again and again to play the tune he had heard, but still she remained dead. He was put in prison for life, and they say to this day, if you ever go by a certain prison in Yugoslavia, you can still hear someone playing a flute and thinking that the beautiful music could make a dead person sit up and listen. Story 68, y'all. The king's son and the poor man's daughter. The king's son went hunting accompanied by a servant, and when a storm came up, he stopped at a small house. A poor old man lived there with his wife and daughter. Knowing that the man was the king's son, the family wanted to treat him to the best they had. So they killed their only chicken and had it for supper. The daughter divided the chicken, giving the neck to her father, the backbone to her mother, and the feet to the servant. She kept the wings and breast for herself and gave 2 legs to the king's son. After supper, everyone went to bed, and the old man and woman discussed their daughter and said, "What kind of a daughter do we have? See what part of the chicken she gave us?" The king's son overheard them talking. So the next day, he asked the daughter why she divided the chicken as she did. She said, "I gave your servant the feet so he can walk well. I gave mother the backbone because she is the head of the house and she needs the backbone. I gave father the neck because one of these days he will have to stretch his neck to see me. And I gave you the legs because you are the king's son, and I wanted to give you the best part. And I kept the wings and breast because one day I will fly away from this house." The king's son thought that she was smart for doing this, and since he liked her very much, he asked her to marry him. She said she would if he didn't mind being married to a poor girl. He said he didn't, so they were married. Soon after the wedding, he told her that she was not to interfere in any of his business, and she said that she wouldn't. Not long after this, a fair was held near the king's son's palace. One of her poor friends brought a cow to the fair, and seeing an unused wagon in the field which belonged to the king's son, he tied his cow to it. While she was tied there, the cow had a calf. After the fair was over, the poor man started to take his cow and new calf home, but the king's son stopped him and took the calf, saying the wagon had the calf. The poor man was so afraid that he said nothing. The king's son's wife saw everything and felt sorry for her poor friend, but she remembered that her husband had said she wasn't to interfere in any of his business. She told her poor friend that she could tell him how to get his calf back, but that he was not to say anything to her husband about it. He was to come back with a fishing hook the next day and go fishing in the field where there was no water. So he did. Her husband saw him and asked what he was doing. The poor man said he was fishing. The king's son said, "How can you fish here where there is no water or fish?" The poor man answered him, "How can your wagon have a calf?" The king's son couldn't answer him and gave the poor man his calf. He knew that the poor man wasn't smart enough to think that out of himself, so he went to his wife. He told her that he'd said she wasn't to interfere in his business, but he knew that she'd thought of the trick, as the poor man wasn't smart enough. She said, "Yes, I thought of it. Those poor people work hard to raise their cow and calf, and they need the money they get from selling them." Her husband then told her to take all that belonged to her and return home, but that she was to eat supper with him for the last time. While they were eating, she added something to his wine, which put him to sleep. She then told the servant to carry him to her home, as she wanted to see her mother, and her husband was drunk. She didn't want to leave him at home. While they were in her mother's home, he came to his senses and found himself lying on the floor with his feet in the ashes near the fireplace. He looked around, saying, "Where am I?" She answered, "Right here with me." He said, "Why did you bring me here?" She replied, "You told me to take everything that belonged to me, and the only thing I really owned was you, so I brought you here with me." He then got up and said, "I see you are very smart, so come back with me." They both went back and lived happily from that time on. Story 69, King Matt and the Wise Old Farmer. King Matt was a famous king. He liked to go among his subjects incognito to see how they were getting along. He often said that some of them were smarter than his ministers. One day, he came upon an old farmer plowing his field with his oxen. He asked the farmer, "How far is far, old-timer?" The farmer answered, "Not very far now, only to the tip of my oxen's horns." Then King Matt asked, "How many of the 32 do you have?" The farmer answered, "Not so many, sir, only 12. King Matt said he had one more question to ask the old farmer. "Could you milk 3 billy goats?" The farmer replied, "Yes, sir." King Matt, at his next court meeting, mentioned this old farmer, adding that he admired his wisdom. He asked his ministers if they understood the riddle, but no one answered. 3 of his ministers were so curious that they went and talked to the farmer. When they asked him the answer to the first part of the riddle, the farmer said, "I will tell you if you will give me 10 pieces of gold." The ministers agreed. "Well," said the farmer, "I used to be able to see as far as the oxen, but now I can see only as far as my oxen's horns." Then they asked the meaning of the second part of the riddle. "I will tell you for 10 more pieces of gold," said the farmer. The ministers agreed, and the farmer said, I used to have 32 teeth, and now I have but 12. The ministers then asked the farmer, "How would you milk 3 old billy goats? After all, they're not milkers." The farmer said that he would tell them for 10 more pieces of gold. After they had given him the gold, he answered, "Milking 3 billy goats is very easy. I just got through milking 3. The 3 ministers hung their heads in embarrassment. They never did tell King Matt that they got the answers to the riddle. All right, story 70. A foolish young man. A young man named Agor was sent out by his father to sell a wagon full of wheat at the village market. Agor loved to drink whiskey, but he didn't like to pay for it, and he never wanted to work. This time, he decided he would do as his father asked and sell his wheat. On his way to the market, he had to pass the orchard of a neighbor, where he saw a gallon of whiskey hanging in a nearby tree. Leaving the wagon of wheat on the path, he proceeded to climb the tree to get the whiskey. The neighbor saw Agor climbing for the whiskey, so he quietly pushed Agor's wheat wagon into his own barn, where the youth could not see it. Agor came down from the tree and realized he didn't have any wheat to sell. In his vexation, he dropped the gallon of whiskey and broke it. There he stood with no wheat and also no whiskey to drink. A very foolish man who thought he could get something for nothing. All right, story 71, The Bet. One winter day in Armenia, a man named Nasruddin Hoja was talking with some of his friends. The subject they were discussing was whether or not a man could exist in a cave at the top of the big mountain in cold weather. His friends said it was impossible for a man to exist, even for one night, without any fire to keep him warm. So Nasruddin Hoja, being an adventurous man, made a bet with his friends. According to the agreement, if he could stay on top of the mountain all night long without any fire or clothing, each of his friends were to give him a brand new suit of clothes. And if he could not stay all night, he was to provide them with a big feast. The next day, in preparation, Nasruddin Hoja took 3 of his 50-pound cats to the top of the mountain where he would stay that night. When night came, his friends took his clothes and sent him off to the cave. Nasruddin Hoja spent a fairly warm night with his cats. The next morning, when he went to meet his friends, they gave him clothing and said, "You have lost the bet." "How can you say that?" asked Nasruddin Hoja. His friends replied, "There was a fire in the next town, and that's what kept you from freezing last night." So Nasruddin Hoja said, "The feast will be on the coming Sunday at 12 o'clock noon." Sunday arrived, and all Nasruddin Hoja's friends were at his house at noon. They waited and waited until finally one of the men got up and said, "Nasruddin Hoja, we have been here for 4 hours and we are hungry. What has been taking you so long in preparing our feast?" Nasrudin Hoya said, "It's cooking. If you do not believe me, come and see for yourself." So they all followed Nasrudin Hoya into the kitchen and saw all the food on a tremendous stove, and in the stove, cooking all the food, was a little candle. One of the men said, "Nasrudin Hoya, how do you expect this little candle to cook all this food?" "Well," said Nasrudin Hoya, "if a fire in another town can keep me warm on a mountaintop, then this little candle can cook all this food." All right, story 72, The Painted Priests. There was a couple who lived along the edge of the road near a church school. During the day, while the wife was sitting on the porch, various priests would pass by her house and would say to her, "Come here, I am dying for you. I love you." Finally, she told her husband that she wanted to move away, for she could not stand the place much longer. Her husband asked her what was the matter, and finally she told him about the priests. "So that is what has been bothering you?" he said. "Well, I'll tell you what to do. Next time a priest says that to you, tell him to come here at night at about 8 o'clock, when I'm not home, and tell him to bring $300 with him." The next day, as she was sitting outside, priest number 1 came by and said, "Come here, I am dying for you. I love you." "Well," she said, "why not come tonight at 8 o'clock, since my husband won't be home then, and bring along $300 with you?" "Oh, I'll bring that much and more, if you want me to," he said. After about half an hour, priest number 2 came by and said, "Come here. I'm crazy about you. I love you." "Well then, come tonight at 15 minutes after 8 and bring $300 with you. My husband won't see us, for he won't be home." This continued all afternoon until priest number 12 had gone by. She had told all of them to come that night and bring $300 with them, and each was to come 15 minutes after the previous one. Of course, each of the priests thought he was the only one who was going to see her. When night came, her husband went outside to hide, and she went to bed. At exactly 8 o'clock, priest number 1 came and knocked on the door. She told him to enter and asked if he had brought the money. He told her he had, and she told him to put it in the chest that was in the hall. He quickly put the money in the chest and hastened to the bedroom to be with her. When he entered the room, she told him she couldn't stand the smell of the clothes priests wore. So he would have to take them off. No sooner had he undressed than her husband knocked on the door and shouted, "I forgot my hatchet. Open the door and let me in." "Oh," said the wife, "that is my husband. Open the trap door and go down in the cellar and wait until he's gone." He opened the trap door, and since it was dark, he did not notice that there were no stairs, and fell into the cellar and into a tub of blue paint that her husband had put down there for him. After a few minutes, priest number 2 arrived. The woman told him much the same thing she had told priest number 1. And after he had undressed, her husband again knocked on the door and made an excuse for coming back. She told the priest to open the trap door and hide there until her husband left, and he too fell into the tub of paint. This went on until all the priests had come and had ended up falling in the tub of paint. After the last priest had fallen into the cellar and paint, the husband nailed the trap door shut as well as the outside entrance to the cellar. Then he burned the priest's clothes, and he and his wife sat down to count the money. In the meantime, the priests began to shiver and sneeze, for it was a cold night. 2 or 3 days later, the man went to the bishop and told him that he and his wife had been hearing strange noises in their cellar, and that they did not know what was making the sounds. The bishop came and blessed the house, and then he opened the cellar door. The hungry priests ran out and went home. Never again did they pass the house saying, "Come here, I'm dying for you. I love you." Story 74, The Monks and the Donkey. Once there were 3 monks who traveled in the country and towns, asking the people for food and anything else they could give to the monastery. They were in the country, and after going to all the houses, they were so loaded down that they could not carry all the food home. So when the head monk saw a donkey tied in one of the farmer's fields, he told one of the monks to go and untie it. The monk said, What will I do if the farmer finds me?" The head monk told him to tie himself in place of the donkey, and the two took the donkey and went home. When the farmer came, he was surprised to see the monk there instead of the donkey. The monk said, "Brother, do not be afraid. Come untie me, and everything will be all right. I was a big sinner, and God punished me by turning me into a donkey." The farmer said, "Oh, excuse me for being so mean to you. I didn't mean to beat you and work you so hard." The monk said, "Oh, that's all right. That was part of my punishment." So the farmer untied him, and he went on his way. A few days after this, there was a fair in that part of the country. The monks took the donkey to the fair to sell him. It so happened that the farmer needed a donkey, and went to the fair to buy one. There he saw and recognized his donkey right away. So he went up to the donkey's ear and said, "Monk, what did you do that you are a donkey again?" He turned around and hunted for another donkey. Story 75, a fish story. Otto was a big, strapping man who was said to be the strongest man in the land. There was nothing that the mighty Otto could not conquer. One day, a traveling man came by Otto's village and told of a great fish in his own country, a fish that no one could catch. On hearing this, Otto saw a new challenge and started out for the traveler's country. When he reached the land where the great fish was, he went to the blacksmith's shop and told the blacksmith to get a ship's anchor and sharpen the edges of it. He then went out and bought a cable an inch thick. He returned to the blacksmith's shop and tied the cable to the anchor. For bait, he used two 20-pound turkeys and placed them on the giant hook. Otto went to the river where the fish lived. The river was a mile across at this place, and according to reports, the fish was so large that he needed a mile to turn around in. Otto grabbed his hook and with a mighty heave threw it into the river. Not realizing his strength, however, he threw too hard and it landed on the far bank in a pig pen. Two large pigs saw the turkeys and tried to eat them, but they too were caught on the hook. Otto began pulling in the line for another toss, but while he was pulling the hook across the river, the giant fish grabbed the hook, and the battle was on. Otto fought the fish for a week without either of them weakening. Finally, waiting until it leaped out of the water, he jumped on its back and began riding it like a horse. The fish bucked like a wild stallion, but it couldn't shake Otto. The fish, now desperate, gave a mighty leap and went so high that both it and Otto froze to death. When they landed, the people of the village, with the help of a number of trains, hauled the fish to the north country so it wouldn't spoil. They put Otto up as a statue in the middle of the square of the new town they built. The people then took out all the hooks with which unsuccessful fishermen had tried to catch the fish, and there were over a ton of them. Afterward, they removed the scales and sold them for sailboats. On the inside of the fish, they built a cannery, and to this day, they are canning the meat and still have more than half of it left. Story 76, The Girl with a Beard. A young man was learning to be a barber. In the old country, one had to be a journeyman barber for 3 years, learning the art of shaving before he could get his certificate. In his wanderings, the youth went from one barber to another doing odd jobs. When he came to one section, he saw a large castle and hoped they would give him a place to sleep. He saw a watchman who asked him what he wanted. He said, "I need sleep. I've been out in the sun all day and I'm tired out." The watchman was sympathetic. "You're welcome to stay here," he said. "I've got 35 rooms, but I don't think you'll be able to stand it." "Don't worry, nothing will bother me. I'll sleep." He went into one room and everything was very nice, with the table set ready for a meal. He couldn't understand this because the food was hot and there was no one around to eat it. He sat down and waited, but no one came. So he went ahead and ate, thanking the Lord for the food after he had finished. In the next room, there was a nice bed, so he took off his clothes, said his prayers, and soon fell asleep. In the middle of the night, he awoke and saw a vision above the bed. It was a young woman who seemed to be in the room, and he thought to himself, "How beautiful you would be if it weren't for your beard. If I shaved you, you'd be as pretty as a picture." Soon a prince came by on a horse. "What you said you must do." The girl sat on a chair while the barber took the soap from his bag and began whipping the lather and stropping his razor. Then he shaved her and said, "Now, see how beautiful you are. I thank you kindly because I've had this beard for 150 years. I was supposed to go to a certain place and select a prince for a husband. I didn't want a husband, but my father told me to pick out a handsome man and get married. I said, 'If I take a husband, you must promise to shave.' He agreed. 'All right, I'll shave my beard, but it will grow on your face.' All this happened just as my father had said. When he shaved his beard for the wedding, it grew on my face. It was a terrible humiliation." At this time, the girl seemed to fade away. Later on, the watchman went on with the story from reports he had heard. The father died about the time of the wedding, and all those who came to the reception left. The princess locked herself in her room, where she remains to this day. Story 77, The Butcher and the Cutter. Many years ago in Poland, there were two fellows, a butcher and a cutter, an executioner. In those days, a butcher had to work 3 years at his trade and then take an examination before he could be a professional. Similar rules were observed for the executioner. When the butcher had finished 3 years of apprenticeship, he decided to go to another town. On the way, he met a man who asked him his name. "I'm a butcher." "I'm a cutter." "Chop heads off." "Well, I'm a butcher. I cut heads off too." Soon they came to a hotel where there was a large group of people eating, drinking, and playing cards. When they stopped for something to eat and the butcher asked for meat, the cutter, who was evidently employed there, brought some. After eating it, the butcher said, "I never did eat that kind of meat before. I kill cows and everything, but I don't know what this is." The cutter said, "You don't understand this kind of meat. It's people meat. This bunch of gangsters here kill people, and I have to slice them up. I kill people too, but tonight you watch out. It will be the end for both of us. You're a butcher and I'm a cutter, but the gang is going to kill all of us." The butcher said, "I'm not worried. I've got a dog with me, and he could fight 6 men at least." "That's no help." When nighttime came, the dog knocked out 6 of the gang. The cutter did the same for 5, and the butcher for 3. However, since this was such a large gang of cutthroats, the 2 men were taken prisoners, and it looked as if it were the end. The cutter spoke to one of the cutthroats. "Before you kill me, give me one promise." "What promise?" "I like to drink wine. All my life I've liked wine. Bring me a glass now." Each of the 2 were brought a glass of wine and their hands freed so they could drink. After drinking some wine, the cutter set the glass down and said, let all that gang be done away with. Make them stiff so they can't get up anymore. This time, let your dog do everything. It's too hard for you." And that's what they did. Then they searched the prisons under the hotel and found a 65-year-old man, a millionaire, who had been a prisoner for many years. Also, they found a little girl. But because there were many gangsters that they hadn't killed, the old man warned the butcher not to lose his dog. When the cutter had finished his wine, he turned the glass upside down. Later, he told the butcher to turn it right side up. He talked to the old millionaire, found he had been a prisoner for 7 years, and had not been kindly treated. He decided that he should get the old man and little girl out of there. So he sent them to his home. He then told the butcher to set fire to everything and burn the hotel and all the outlaws in it, which he did. The millionaire took the child home with him to live and grow up. The butcher and the cutter both escaped with their lives, and evidently the dog too, and went on to have more adventures. Story 78, El Rabo. One of the favorite legends told by the people of Campiello, a small village near the Bay of Biscay in Spain, is the tale of a little dog called El Rabo. This little female dog was so called because she was so small and had such an unusually long tail. El Rabo had been around Campiello for years and years. It wasn't the same dog, but the legend has it that El Rabo died after she had one litter of pups. Only one dog in the litter looked like its mother, and it was also a female. Therefore, it inherited the name of El Rabo. Then, it in turn died after one litter of pups, one of which was a female who looked like the mother, and so on. El Rabo belonged to no one in particular. She would stay around one home for a while and then move on to another. The strange thing about El Rabo was that when she chose a home to live in, she seemed to affect the lives of those who lived in that particular place. If the man and wife were not getting along well, there would soon be a change and the couple would be happy and contented with each other. If there were sickness in the home, which she chose, good health would soon return. If the family was in financial need, the presence of El Rabo would work magic and things would change for the better. El Rabo soon became a symbol of happiness, health, and prosperity. When she was seen roaming through the village, everyone tried to coax her into coming home with him. The little dog, however, followed none of the coaxers. It seemed as if she knew just the very house where she was needed and went directly to it. It is said that there had been an El Rabo for more than 75 years. The last El Rabo had gone to home where there was much illness and poverty. After the arrival of the little dog, things began to change. The children's health began to improve, and the father, after many months of idleness, found employment. It is said that a very selfish man came to the home one night and put El Rabo in a sack, intending to take her to his house so he would have good luck. El Rabo managed to escape, and on her way back to the home from which she had been stolen, got her leg caught in a fox trap. The next morning, her body was found by a farmer. As a result of her death, there was never another El Rabo, but her name will always be a legend in the town of Campiello. Story 79, La Bruja. One day, the priest of the little village of Babonil in the province of Asturias heard a knock at his door. Opening it, he found a thin, white-haired woman who was probably in her late 60s. Her face was so bony that it was actually repulsive. The priest asked what he could do for her. She told him she had lived in many villages, but she had been put out of each because the people called her a witch and feared her. She said she was getting old and wanted only a place to live where she could have a garden and a few chickens and could be left alone to live out her remaining years in peace. The priest offered her a house on a small farm at the edge of town which belonged to the parish. He said it had a small barn, a good well, and several apple trees. He assured her she could stay there as long as she wished. He also said he would give her a few chickens, some corn, and some seeds for her garden. The old woman knelt and kissed his shoes in gratitude. He took her in his wagon to the farm and gave her bread, eggs, cheese, and milk. The old woman worked hard planting her garden, tending the chickens, and loosening the soil around the apple trees. She kept away from the townspeople, but eventually had to go into town to sell or trade her eggs for food until she could use the vegetables from her garden. When the town people saw her, they were shocked at her bony face. Most of them would lower their eyes. Some of them had heard that she had been driven out of the next village, and they complained to the priest. The priest, however, said that the farm belonged to the parish and that the old woman was harmless and would remain on the farm as long as she wished. Although she was repulsive to the adults, she seemed to have a fascination for the small children. Little by little, they began to go to her house. She delighted them with stories and always gave them an apple from the trees, which were now bearing large, juicy fruit. The parents cautioned the children to stay away from her, but they seemed drawn to her home. One day, a boy and his sister came to her and asked her to tell them stories. She did, and then gave each of them an apple, pointing out that since it was beginning to get dark, they should go home. The boy said they would cut through the farmyards instead of going by way of the road, and would get home before dark. They had gone only a few steps when the Bruja called and said, "You must go by way of the road. You must not go through the farmyards." The boy agreed, but told his sister they would have to take the shortcut or it would be dark before they got home and their parents would punish them. The girl reminded him that the Bruja had just told them to take the road home, but her brother insisted on going the other way. When they were walking through the farm of Senor Velez, the boy was attacked by a dog. He yelled at his sister to run. Senor Velez heard the children's screams and rushed out and grabbed the dog, which had broken loose from his chain. The boy was saved from severe bites and serious injury by the thickness of his clothing and the intervention of the man. When the parents were told of the Bruja's warning to take the road home, they were grateful for her advice. On another occasion, little Maria Fernandez was enchanted by a pair of earrings which her mother prized highly. They had belonged to the child's great-grandmother, and although the mother permitted her to look at them, she made her promise never to take them out of the house, since they were a valued heirloom. She told Maria the earrings would be hers when she was 18 years old. One day, Maria put on the earrings, and her little girlfriend called for her to come over and play. Maria forgot about having the earrings on and went down the road to her playmate's house. When she came home, her mother saw her and said, "What are you doing with that earring on? Where's the other one?" Maria touched her ears and realized that one was missing. She and her mother retraced her steps and searched for the lost earring, but were unable to find it. As a punishment, the child was confined to the house for a week. The first day that she was allowed to leave the house, Maria went to visit the Bruja. She told her about the earring she had lost and that her mother felt bad about it. La Bruja told her to keep looking, and perhaps she would find it yet. She told her to look carefully. She gave the child an apple and told her to sit down, and she would tell her some stories. She was in the middle of a story when she jumped up suddenly and said, "Maria, you must go home right now. When you reach the spot where the road narrows near the old water pump, you must walk near the edge of the road, along the ditch, and keep your eyes on the ground." Maria wanted to know why, but the old woman said, "You must not ask why. Just do as I tell you." The little girl promised that she would. When she reached the spot the Bruja had mentioned, she kept her eyes on the ground. By the side of the old water pump, Maria saw something glistening in the sun. She looked closely and saw it was the lost earring. She picked it up and ran home to show her mother. She also told her the instructions the Bruja had given her. On another occasion, Ramon, a crippled boy, had come to visit the old woman. After he had been there a while, he said he must go in order to get a ride on his neighbor's wagon as he came home from work. The Bruja told him he must walk home and not ride in the wagon. At first, Ramon insisted he wanted to ride, as it was difficult for him to walk with his lame leg. But the old woman was so insistent that he walk, that he promised he would not ride in the wagon. That night at the supper table, he heard his parents talking about their neighbor's accident. It seemed that the horse pulling the wagon was frightened by a large snake crossing the road, and the man could not control it. The wagon hit a large boulder and overturned, and the man was hurt seriously. Ramon told his parents of his intention to ride on the wagon, and of the Bruja's insistence that he walk home. The townspeople still feared the Bruja, but all agreed that her strange powers resulted in good deeds. They accepted her living on the parish farm, and when she died, only the priest and the children went to view her body. When the children went home, they all told their parents that the Bruja in death was no longer ugly. They said she looked very pretty. The parents, out of curiosity, decided to see for themselves. When they viewed her body, they were amazed. Her white hair seemed to have a golden sheen, and her features to have taken on a look of gentleness. Even her mouth seemed to be smiling softly. They all began to think of how many times she had protected their children from harm by her forebodings and warnings. It was not until she was dead that they all agreed she was not a Bruja at all, but a woman who loved and protected children. When the Bruja was buried, all who could possibly do so attended the services and brought flowers. It is said that the birds in the cemetery were so numerous and their singing was so loud that it was impossible to hear the words of the priest.